So let's start over. We're going to rewind and start over. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your patience. Staff Advisor Touch.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bellman. Yeah, this is the first sort of virtual and Zoom and in-person meeting of the Wildfire Safety Advisory Board. Sorry for all the technical difficulties in getting this set up, but we hope we're good to go now. On Zoom, again, if you want to comment, use the raised hand feature, and please use the raised hand feature if you are having trouble hearing us in the room. Because of our new setup here, we're not sure how well you can hear. You can also call on the phone, and the number is 1-866-390-1828. There's a passcode 787909. And when you join the call, you'll be in listening mode. If you want to comment, press #2, and you'll be added to a queue to comment. And finally, there's an email address, wsab@energysafety.ca.gov, in which you can comment or suggest that you're having technical difficulties hearing us. Next slide. And the next slide. You can find, as I mentioned earlier, the relevant materials for today's meetings at this website on the slide. And also you can observe the public comments that have come in at this second website on this slide. Next slide, please. I've already once gone over and introduced the board members. Just to reiterate, Chair Block is unable to make it with us today, and board member Alexandra Seifert is unable to make it today, but the remaining 4 board members forming a quorum are here in the in-person meeting in Sacramento. And next slide, please. Actually, I'm going to turn this over to Diane now, to Vice Chair Fellman, for a little bit of introductory comments, and then we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance after that.
Thanks, Tim. And I do want to, again, thank everyone for your patience. Chair Block and board member Seifert are listening in as members of the public under the open meeting laws. We could not create the accommodations that were necessary for them to directly participate. However, I want to assure everyone who's observing and participating today that they were active in the preparation of these 2023 recommendations for the investor-owned utility WMP guidelines. We'll be going through those in detail a bit later. I just want to say, as a matter of opening this meeting, that we are in this beautiful building in our new home, the California Natural Resources Agency. We do have one member of the public in person, so thank you. I'm hoping we get one public comment in person. And I want to thank, in this case, I can accurately say it, my fellow board members for making the journey here today. I also want to thank, I'm calling the meeting to order. I forgot to do that officially. And today is April 26, 2022. And I want to thank Justin Ander and Yemi, if I say it correctly, Charlatan, is that correct? Thank you. Our professionals for assistance in ensuring this meeting is actually going forward. I won't go so far as to say running smoothly, which is in my script. And I want to thank Mr. Todd and also Teresa Graber, who is not with us today, for working hard to make this meeting happen, and equally importantly, getting us here, and most importantly, preparing the recommendations. I'm going to turn the meeting back over to Tim to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bellman. So if you will all place your hands over your hearts or do as is your practice and repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next slide, please. We're now pausing for a safety moment. And the message here today is we're coming on wildfire season. Wildfire hopefully is not coming dramatically like it has been in the last few years, but please be ready. There's a CAL FIRE new website where you can plan on a web-based app to create your custom wildfire preparedness action plan. You can get text messages on wildfire incidents near you, so you can know what's going on, and you can act by following the evacuation steps that you've planned or that are on the CAL FIRE website. So please be safe, and please say your prayers or whatever for not having a dramatic catastrophic wildfires this year. I'd like to turn the meeting back to Vice Chair Fellman now.
Thank you, Mr. Tutt. Now let's review our
Next slide.
Next slide. Let's review our agenda. First, we're going to open with public comments, and then we're going to have a discussion of the February 23rd, 2022 and vote on the meeting minutes. Then we've invited Lucy Morgans, who gratefully accepted, from the Office of Energy Safety, OEIS, to update us on their activities. Next, we'll get to the discussion and vote on our recommendations to OEIS for the additional requirements for the 2023 wildfire mitigation guidelines for the investor-owned utilities, and then the meeting will adjourn. I already gave some opening comments, and I will have a few more on the content of the recommendations. However, I would like to ask if there's anyone on the board who's present, if he would like to make some general opening comments on today's meeting. Mr. Armstrong.
So it's been, thanks, Chair Feldman. So it's been, January 2020 was the first time that we actually all met together for the first time. So it's good to be back together somewhat face to face after 2 years apart and doing this remotely. Look forward to getting back to work, and just thank all the other board members for their participation.
Mr. Rayburn.
Thank you, Vice Chair Feldman. I was reflecting this morning when we first began our work and reflecting on the wildfire mitigation plans that we reviewed and progression that the wildfire mitigation plans have made. There's obviously a lot more work to do. There's a lot more improvements to be made, but I do see an evolution in the wildfire mitigation plans and more effectively identifying wildfire mitigation risk and mitigating it. So I look forward to a further progression of getting to a better place for the people of California in the future.
And Vice Chair, thank you. I see this as an opportunity for us now to move the WMPs out of the academic realm into actually exploring with the IOUs and the POUs for us also the actual effect of their mitigating protocols, their veg management work, so that we'll have the opportunity to actually see how it's actually been beneficial for the state of California.
Thank you. And I'll wrap this up by saying that one thing we did change this year, we mentioned it at our last meeting, is we did not comment on the 2022 IOU WMP updates. We reviewed those and we focused our efforts on being forward-looking, and you'll hear more about that from Ms. Morgans, but this is a change for us, and we're really excited about being able to now get to a level of both forward-looking and granularity to improve the IOUs, the guidelines. So all the public, we see ourselves as representatives of the citizens of California in terms of accessing the content of the WMPs, so it is understandable, transparent, and comprehensive. And that's where we put our focus. So thank you. Next slide, please. We will now move to public comments. And Mr.
Bellman, may I just add to that, this is a time for general public comment,
Yes.
and that there will be opportunities for public comment on the individual items on the agenda as we go through those items.
Okay, thank you. Are there any individuals present? Is the individual present? Would you like to address the board today on any general matters? Okay, thank you. Turning to remote comments, Justin, do we have anyone who would like to make general public comments on Zoom?
No hands raised currently.
Thank you. Any comments on the phone, Justin?
No hands raised currently.
Tim, anything in the mailbox?
Nothing in the mailbox, Mr. Chair.
All right. We appreciate public comments, and hopefully we understand these are the general comments, and we look forward to anyone's comments that will come when we're talking about the specific recommendations. Thank you, everyone, for that interlude. Let's have the next slide, please. We are now going to move to the consideration of the February 23rd, 2020 meeting minutes. I'm sure that everyone has had an opportunity to look at them and review them. Is there anyone that has any edits or corrections or changes? Hearing none, may I get a motion to adopt the February 23rd board meeting minutes?
So moved. Board Member Porter.
I'll second it. Board Member Armstrong.
We will now call for Mr. Tutt to take a roll call on the roll call vote on the motion to adopt the February 23rd board meeting minutes. Please call for the vote.
Okay. Board Member Armstrong.
Aye.
Board Member Mader.
Aye.
Board Member Porter.
Aye.
And Vice Chair Feldman.
Aye. We are now, thank you for the vote. We're now pleased to be joined by Lucy Morgans, who's Program Manager in the Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety. And Lucy is going to give us an update as I measured. I see her queued up. Welcome, Lucy. We wish you were here next time.
Yeah, definitely next time. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay.
We can. Can anyone, is everyone here, Lucy? Thank you.
Great. Right, I'll kick off. So good afternoon, everyone. My name's Lucy Morgans, and I'm the new Programme Manager in the Electric Safety Policy Division of the Office of Energy Infrastructure, or Energy Safety, Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety, or Energy Safety. I've taken it over from Melissa Semser, who's now Deputy Director. And you may recognise me because I was in this same role temporarily for 7 months last year. So I'm here today to provide you with a brief update on Energy Safety's 2022 progress since the last board meeting. So firstly, I want to start off with the recommendations that we received from the boards, and I want to say thank you very much for these. They were focused, as you mentioned earlier, on the 2023 Wildfire Mitigation Plan, or WMP guidelines, and focused on the future of the guidelines and performance metrics. And we received these on April the 18th. The team felt these were insightful and thought-provoking comments. We very much appreciate your continued engagement on these most important matters. These recommendations will be particularly useful as we develop our 2023 Wildfire Mitigation Plan guidelines, which I'm going to talk a little more about later on. Now I'd like to turn to provide an update on our progress since the last board meeting. So firstly, taking the wildfire mitigation plans, the 2022 updates. As a reminder, the 2022 WMP updates were submitted by the large electric utilities in February. So that's PG&E, SCE and SDG&E. The team is in the process of evaluating these. We received stakeholder and public comments on April the 11th and reply comments on April the 18th. And these public comments are being reviewed by the team and will be considered during the evaluation process. So I'm pleased to report that Energy Safety is on track to publish a draft decision or a revision notice for each of the 3 large electric utilities within the 3-month statutory timeframe. The first of these will be on SDG&E's 2022 WMP update, which will be published in mid-May, so just a couple of weeks away. The small utilities, known as the small multi-jurisdictional utilities, SMJUs, and the ITOs, the independent transmission operators, they're due to submit their 2022 WMP updates on May the 6th. So Energy Safety will be holding a workshop on May the 18th to seek feedback from the public on these plans. And then we'll have opening and reply comments due on June 20th and June 27th, respectively. So now moving back to the wildfire mitigation plan guidelines for 2023. So looking ahead, we're developing these guidelines for 2023, and 2023 is the start of a new 3-year WMP cycle covering the years 2023, 2024 and 2025. And as such, the utilities will be submitting a comprehensive or a base WMP rather than WMP updates as they have done for the past 2 years. So as a reminder, 2023.
Excuse me, I'm sorry,
Guys.
you're breaking up a bit. Could you pause? Yemi, what
Line.
should we do?
Aim to firstly update, restructure the information the utilities submit.
Lucy, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
You froze for about the last 2 minutes and broke up. So could you please back up? I think the last thing we heard was there's going to be a revision, not an update for 2023.
Okay, let me move my laptop just to make sure it's not coming from my end. Hold on, give me 1 second. Hopefully this is better. Can you hear me a bit better now?
Yes.
Okay, let me carry on. So
We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Okay, I'll put my video back on. Okay, so
Thank you.
Did you say the last you heard was on the 2023 guidelines?
I think just start from the top of that section, please.
Okay, will do. Sorry about that. Okay, so on the 2023 wildfire mitigation guidelines. So looking ahead, Energy Safety is developing guidelines for the 2023 WMP submissions. 2023 is the start of a new 3-year WMP cycle covering 2023 to 2025 plan period. As such, the utilities will be submitting comprehensive or base WMPs rather than WMP updates, as they have done for the past 2 years. As a reminder, the 2023 guidelines aim to do 4 key things. Firstly, update the maturity model, which provides a benchmark for utility performance. Restructure the guidelines to streamline information the utilities submit. Increase transparency in utilities' risk and prioritization calculations. And lastly, minimize the changes within a 3-year WMP cycle to ensure that WMP updates are actually updates. We held an all-day public workshop last week where we presented proposals for the 2023 guidelines and discussed these at some length with stakeholders. And in terms of next steps, we aim to publish the draft 2023 guidelines for public comment in late summer and to finalise them in the fall. Now, moving on to a couple of other work areas that we have. I want to give you an update on executive compensation. So in terms of our work on this area, 4 utilities submitted their executive compensation structures on March the 14th. Energy Safety is in the process of reviewing these submissions according to the 2022 Executive Compensation Guidelines, and we will be drafting a response in due course. We are also working internally to develop our draft 2023 Executive Compensation Guidelines for comment. And now, moving away from the policy team towards the area of compliance, I want to provide a brief update on this. So compliance is underway, publishing their audits on the 2020 WMP substantial vegetation management. Southern California Edison's has already been published. Compliance is also completing their first full cycle of WMP compliance reviews on the 2020 WMPs, and the results are due at the end of September. Also of note is that compliance is overseeing and directing the independent evaluator, or IE, reviews for the 2021 WMPs. The IE annual report for each utility is due on the 1st of July. And just to close out, I very much look forward to continuing our work with the board and to leverage your expertise in reducing utility-related catastrophic wildfires in California. And thank you very much for your time, and apologies for the bad reception.
No worries. Thank you very much, Ms. Morgans. And we appreciate your feedback, your initial feedback on receiving our recommendations. We look eagerly forward to how you're going to respond or any questions you have. And what we're hoping is, since we have moved this forward to April, the end of April rather than the end of June, that we will be involved in conversations with you and as you develop the guidelines going forward. So we're very excited about our working relationship and the opportunity to engage at this early stage. Thank you so much also for inviting us to participate in the various workshops you've been having and offering access to your consultants who are working, Jensen Hughes, who are working on the guidelines with you. It's been very, very helpful for us and has actually given us some grounds for thought and how we want to move forward to be more meaningful to you, as well as I mentioned earlier, really creating a product that is meaningful to the citizens of California. So thank you again. And does anyone on the board have any questions for Ms. Morgans or comments? Mr. Mader?
Well, I do actually have a question. Thank you, Ms. Morgans. It was a little hard with the interruption, but you mentioned that on the revision that you'll be seeking more reports on the effectiveness of certain expenditures, right? From I think that's how to characterize it. Are we talking about specific projects? Are we talking about tranches of different types of mitigation investment? How is that ask for effectiveness reporting going to be structured? Or did I mishear?
Yeah, I'm not sure actually. Are you talking about this year's WMP updates, or are you talking about the 2023 guidelines?
I was a little unclear because of the breakup in the way that you gave your report. So, perhaps we should reach out and take this offline.
Yeah, of course.
Good. May we We were scheduled to have a stretch break. However, I think we had a breakdown already. So it stretched stretched us. So we're going to skip that. And then we're going to move on to the board discussion and adoption of the recommendations. And I'll read the official title: to OEIS on additional requirements for the 2023 wildfire mitigation guidelines. And can we have the next slide, please? I'm going to turn it over to the board's advisor, Tim Tutt, to the third slide. Yes, we are back. There we go. Tim Tutt is now going to lead us through those recommendations. And in one slight variation that we would like to have, the board would like to have as you present, if you could pause, Mr. Tutt, after every section, and then the board members who engaged, each board member has different expertise. You can find our backgrounds on the website, and we form Bagley-Keene groups around our areas of knowledge, experience, and interest. And of course, due to Bagley-Keene, I'm looking at our council right now, we are not allowed to discuss prior to this public meeting what the different Bagley-Keene groups have put into our recommendations. So this is an opportunity. We'll first take an opportunity while Mr. Tutt is presenting for any board member comment on that particular set of recommendations. And that will be followed at the end by a board general discussion on the recommendations and how we want to move forward. So I'll turn it now over to Mr. Tutt.
Thank you, Vice Chair Fellman. And can I have one slide forward, please? So this is the recommendations document that we put out. I'm sorry, the title is different in the script than it is on the document, but this is the actual title, Recommendations to Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety on Additional Wildfire Mitigation Plan Requirements and Performance Metrics. And it's structured in 5 separate sections. The first is structure and scope. The second is risk modeling and reporting. The third is vegetation management and environmental stewardship. The fourth is system design and operation, grid hardening, and the fifth is communications and community outreach. And there's a series of board recommendations coming from each of those sections. Next slide, please. So in structure and scope, what the board recommends is that the WMPs, the guidelines should suggest that the WMPs have upfront cohesive summaries that are short and not redundant with some of the good graphics that we see already in the WMPs, but also in the presentations and workshops and such. We know there are excellent ways of describing visually the material in the WMPs without going to a great deal of length of word, and we are recommending that continue and be enhanced. Second, we recommend using a topical structure to help reduce redundancy. And by that, we mean going through the topics similar to the structure of the document: vegetation management in one place, grid hardening and grid operations in one place, etc. Third, we described that we appreciate the collaboration with relevant agencies and hope that it is continued and enhanced, because without that collaboration, we feel like the state's wildfire efforts can be potentially duplicative or even act against each other. Fourth, we recommend that the WMPs themselves be, in a sense, standalone, and not that they are necessarily voluminous, but that any supplemental or ancillary information that would support a WMP would be found in links inside the WMP to that information, rather than having the public and reviewers know where to find that information outside of the WMP without any reference to it. And fifth, we are recommending, again, separate guidelines on smaller IOUs and ITOs. We don't feel like they should be facing the same degree of reporting burden and others as the larger IOUs. They are smaller, they have fewer resources, and we're looking to see how we can help OEIS develop those separate guidelines. One thought is that these smaller entities use a upfront template table, such as the one that the board recommended that the POUs and the state use in their WMPs, to just sort of consolidate information about the utility in one or two simple pages.
Thank you. Are there any comments on this section from Mr. Mader? Did you have a comment?
I wanted to talk about the scope and structure.
That's fine.
Okay,
That's what we're on.
So one of the feedback items was they wanted more clarity on the board's recommendations regarding operation between the OIES and the CPUC. And my understanding is that our recommendation intent is that the WMPs include those CPUC proceedings that the WMPs are dependent on in order to deliver the mitigation risk, the risk mitigation that the WMPs are intending to achieve. And I read this, with that feedback in mind, I read the recommendation, and I could see where there might be some conclusion about leading the regulatory mission of the two bodies. And so I don't know exactly how to remedy that in these proceedings today, but I think that I did want to go on record stating that it's really our intent for the investor-owned utilities to list in those WMPs the dependencies that exist in these CPUC proceedings to achieve their risk mitigation that they intend.
Thank you. That is my reading as well, and there's an interest definitely we are not interested in expanding either jurisdiction or trying to cross the regulatory boundary that exists that's been established over 100 years of regulatory legislation and constitutional authority at the Public Utilities Commission, nor to compromise the burgeoning work on wildfire mitigation being done by OEIS. And in that vein, I'd like to comment and underscore what Mr. Tutz said, and you just also mentioned. The concept is there's a lot of material already on the proceedings that are at the PUC and bringing in the relationship to the work that the utilities, the IOUs do in their mitigation plans based on PUC requirements. And where there's a list, and we appreciate that there was a list of all of those put into, I believe it's appendix, I think it's section 9.2. It's at the end of the WMPs, just asking for whenever there's we could have hot links into not just where it is in the WMP, but also if somebody really wants to drill into it, where a reader could find that information on the PUC website. So thank you for that. And we also received comments from the ITOs and the smaller jurisdiction utilities, and we appreciate your support for streamlining. As Mr. Tutz said, we have some ideas about that, and we're happy to share those with OEIS. So any other comments on structure and scope?
I'd like to further speak to the board's intent when
this is your chance.
In trying to gather that information in one place, because I think it's important when we look back and see the effectiveness of a WMP that was submitted when it's dependent on other proceedings and other regulatory bodies like the CPUC. If you don't know what those proceedings are, then you may not be able to do an accurate job in determining how accurate or how effective a WMP was, which goes to future recommendations for WMPs and making those better in order to make the.
And I'll just conclude by saying that we want to recognize there was a tremendous advancement, not only in that list, but also in the discussion of the coordination among the federal, state, relevant local public safety agencies, all the local governments, the CCAs, the community choice aggregators, and the tribal governments. So we did see progress and movement in that direction in this update. So I'll turn it back to Mr. Tutt. Do you have a comment?
Yes, Vice Chair Bellman, I just wanted to add in this section that we did receive a comment that indicated that we might have not have been clear as we could have been on our discussion of funding information and budgetary information that is in the WMPs and also in CPUC cases. And I just wanted to suggest that we are intending to add a little bit of clarification to the document to recognize that funding decisions are actually made at the CPUC, not in WMPs, and that the timing of various cases may lead to, despite the fact that we prefer there to be as much synchronization and similar information as possible, may lead to some information being out of sync with the other venue in one case or another, and that's okay with us.
Ms. Ogren, is with respect to that clarification, do we need to approve specific language today, or can we we will have to amend the document to reflect the clarification that Mr. Tutt?
I think as long as you have the spirit of what your amendment is going to be and you guys can articulate that in this meeting, you can approve it with those amendments.
And so when we do that, and that was what Mr. Mader was addressing.
Yes.
When we do that, we'll have to first vote on the amendment, and then we'll go to the full language. So just remind me, Ms. Ogren, if you could remind me of that.
Will do.
All right, let's go to, thank you. Any other comments? Mr. Tutt, next slide.
Yeah, the next slide is risk modeling and reporting. And here the board is recommending that utilities avoid describing risks or model parameters as unknown. We understand there's uncertainty out there, but there are scientific methods of dealing with uncertainty. So simply saying that we don't know what the uncertainty is or we can't measure it scientifically really shouldn't be part of the modeling efforts for WMPs. If there's that much uncertainty, we may want to think about doing something else with those models or with other models. Second, we recommended tracking notices of violation over time and reporting those that require immediate correction. Just short descriptions of those. To be clear, we're not recommending that all notices of violation and notices of are from other agencies are tracked and described in the WMPs. We're suggesting a way of being able to look at the trend of notices of violation so that we can see how those are changing over time. And then if there are any that are severe and wildfire related, to have a short description of those in the WMPs would be useful in our minds. Thirdly, the board is suggesting that the OEIS and the utilities develop public maps showing risk probabilities detailing by area what mitigation efforts are and showing where those efforts are focused so that the public can understand in a visual way fairly clearly where the utilities are putting the most effort into wildfire mitigation and various vegetation management, grid hardening, other topical areas of the effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any comments on this section by the board members? Mr. Porter.
Yeah, I want to talk about creating a map, a public map about where they're actually putting their efforts, the IOUs. It gives us a roadmap to really what's actually taking place, what the actual efforts will glean us later on, right? Showing us exactly what the strategy moving forward will be for the next WMPs. As Lucy Morgan said, there won't be updates in 2023. They will be new WMPs, and we can compare the new WMPs with the old updates and the first initial. Showing where and why the efforts were where they were in the past will give us a clear history of what's working and what isn't. Right now, it's kind of, we're trying to figure that out on the run. And so if we have a little bit more detailed maps of where they focused, what the results of those focuses are, will give us more information. That's the reason why we're very interested in that.
Thank you. Any other comments? Mr. Mader.
Well, I think risk modeling, this is one of the most difficult areas to develop. There simply isn't some of the data necessary to try to develop the SURE network. Just doesn't exist. It would take decades in order to gather this data. So you've got to make choices when you're making risk modeling decisions. And I think the board feels that these choices should be public. These choices should be shared so that we can try, as all the parties that are participating and trying to find the best way forward can help to determine which are the most effective. There isn't, so a lot of this is engineering. It's not exactly going to be science, but we can use the scientific method to be able to try to explain the method, the measurement, and that way we can share best practices and we can get to a better situation for the people in California where wildfire risk is better mitigated.
Any other comment? All right. Thank you. Mr. Tutt, next slide, next section.
So this section is vegetation management and ecology, and the board's recommendations are that the utilities should report on the use of latest fire science, longer-term changes in ecosystems that may increase hazards, and unintended changes in conditions. The board is aware of some cases or instances where research shows that, for example, certain kinds of vegetation management, clearing of spaces beneath power lines can have unintended changes in wind speeds and in temperatures and so on in nearby areas, and actually maybe have an oppositional effect on wildfire risk if it's not done carefully. Second, the board is recommending that energy safety collaborates with agencies regarding tree removals and nearby vegetation management. We understand that some of the activity is not under the purview and authority of OEIS or energy safety. Resides with other state agencies, but significant and substantial collaboration there is necessary for a seamless picture on vegetation management around utility assets and utility wildfire issues. Third, we like the idea of expanding pilot programs for dispensable space under utility power lines, including being able to plant low-growing shrubs that act as ember catchers under those lines, as opposed to having bare ground being potentially replaced by dry and flammable grass. And we understand that that requires that same kind of collaboration often with agencies about how vegetation is handled in forested areas, for example. And then finally, we recommend that the utilities report on the use of herbicides and growth regulators in any vegetation management activities. Obviously, there's other types of vegetation management, but in particular, the use of herbicides and growth regulators can have implications on the rest of the ecosystem and public safety that need to be carefully managed as they're applied in these situations. Thank you.
Thank you. Any board member comments on this section?
I mean, I could just touch base at my two fellow board members who are not here. I mean, this has kind of been their wheelhouse, but with regards.
Oh, you're in the Begg McKean group.
That's correct.
Thank you.
So the majority of the, when we start talking about the science behind a lot of this stuff, it comes from them and some of the knowledge that I gained from them. They're both academics and scientists, and I'm a field person, so learning a lot from them as well. But two things here with the pilot program under the scorch earth versus some other type of vegetation that doesn't ignite as quickly is something that was new to me. We've been talking about it for a couple of years, that the idea behind removing all vegetation is that has the potential of striking a power line and igniting a fire is one aspect of it, but failure on that particular asset that could ignite a fire with grass is that a lot easier than it would with something else. So expanding those pilot programs and seeing how those work is something that we think is critical in the future. Again, once the fire is ignited, the intensity of that vegetation for that fire is one thing, but preventing the ignition is something that we're would like to expand on a little more. And the other is just, I think it was the lack of knowledge from some of the board members that the use of herbicides and regulators in some of these applications. And I think that's trying to get a handle on the amount of that stuff that's being used. So that's about it.
Thank you for representing Chair Block and Board Member Seifert today as well, who unfortunately could not join us. Any other comments on vegetation management? All right, let's go to the next topic, please, Mr. Tutt.
Thank you. This is system design and grid hardening, and we're recommending, or the board is recommending, that there be a summary table in the future WMPs for research efforts and pilot projects. In the current WMPs, those are described one by one in a fairly constrained format that I think leaves people wondering what the overall picture for research efforts and pilot projects are, and where things are really focused in those areas. We're also recommending that WMPs have a specific response to lessons learned from prior fires. And a lot of that's happening already, but if there is a specific piece of equipment that has been known to cause a previous fire, future WMPs should describe what the utility is doing about that kind of equipment in its high fire threat district, so that the future fires from the same equipment can potentially be avoided. We're also recommending that the utilities include protocols for workforce safety with new technologies and practices. We understand that workforce safety is an important issue for all of the IOUs and for all of the utilities, frankly. But as we move into new technologies and new practices to deal with wildfire mitigation, we want to make sure that those workers are aware of any changes in safety practices that may come along. And finally, we are encouraging the utilities to, again, identify and report on idle but energized lines, and whether those can be reasonably de-energized, and to report on the status of any legacy equipment which may have been built before the adoption of GO95 and is now potentially covered by some of the same protocols that the utilities use under GO95 for more recent lines, but want to make sure that we understand what's going on with that legacy equipment, that older equipment.
Thank you. Any comments? Mr. Armstrong?
I mean, I could talk on a couple different things under the protocols for workforce safety. I mean, as we continue to move into pilot programs and even just regular system hardening, we're utilizing stuff that hasn't been utilized. We'll just use covered conductor as an example. Covered conductor is a good tool for what we're using it for, but when somebody has to go back to that location, making sure that, you know, the workforce safety, say grounding and de-energizing of the line, it, you know, there's protocols in place on how to do that stuff. It's becomes a little more difficult, especially when you have to, if you're installing grounds on a line that has insulated conductor, you know, you don't want to remove the insulation, but you have to work on it, especially in places where it's difficult to access. And then how do you repair that to ensure that the integrity of the installation and the work that you've done in the past is still there afterwards? And we're seeing a little bit some issues with that on how to properly ground, you know, when the line is de-energized, to ground it, to work on it, especially again in areas where it's not you can't access through with equipment. It's all done off the poles and boards and stuff like that. So just making sure as we move into technology, different technologies, that the people out there working on it understand the changes, the work procedures that go along with it. And that could go on with anything. You know, anytime we add a new piece of equipment, making sure that anybody that has access to that equipment in the field is properly trained and understand all the details behind it. I know we're trying to do what we can to limit the exposure to this equipment for creating fires and getting out as quickly as can. We just got to make sure that the workforce that is working on it understands everything that goes along with it. The other thing would be just the identifying and report of idle lines, idle but energized lines. I mean, there have been cases where sections of lines that really had no reason to be energized could have and may have created a fire. So just looking at those and just trying to reduce the risk. If it's not in use, not serving a purpose at that time, just taking that risk out of the equation. One more thing that we wouldn't have to worry about. So those are the two things that I touch base on.
Mr. Fordham.
Yeah, and then I like to piggyback on Board Member Armstrong. The current iteration of the large IOUs right now aren't what they were in the beginning. They inherited quite a number of smaller municipal and investor-owned utilities throughout the state to be in their current size. So this board is really concerned about legacy equipment that ultimately don't fall under the current iteration of the General Order 95 for overhead construction. There are several lines throughout the state that are over 100 years old. Structures are over 100 years old. Equipment, and definitely they could be considered historical, but not all of them are identified. And that's a concern for us. Currently, I do know that there are a couple of circuits that run through the Eastern Sierras that are at least 115 years old that are currently active transmission circuits. But what we were concerned about is in the high threat fire districts, are they actually identified? Do the utilities know where they are? What risk they pose, and what are they doing to mitigate? Are they looking to rebuild? And if not, to what standard? If they are legacy in the sense they're not under the current GEO 95 standards, what are they looking to do moving forward to mitigate that risk?
Thank you. Mr. Mader.
Yes, if I may. So I would like to talk to the legacy equipment. There's GEO 95 has certain maintenance requirements. It's got certain loading design priorities. And a lot of this equipment was designed before that, and a lot of it predates that. It was done probably at the time with sound engineering decisions, but a lot of time over years, situations change. The equipment age changes. We've seen this before. We've seen black swan events involving older equipment where it's been inspected and there was a problem. We've made this recommendation before. Some of the public comments have been that this equipment is inspected. Well, that equipment was inspected. And so what we're recommending is that equipment be identified, be studied. It may not need to be changed. It may be fine, and that's fine. As long as we look at it, we try to identify, is there a problem with this equipment, or could there be a problem with this kind of equipment? I think it warrants a closer analysis. We're talking about some very old equipment, and I've seen relays. I've seen the old stuff in our system. It functioned, but as the rest of the system changes and as the situation, as its surroundings change, it wasn't able to successfully meet the safety standards that it was designed to meet at the time. And that's the effort I think that should be made.
Yeah, piggybacking on that,
Please.
yeah, the size of California's population for the older construction wasn't intended to bear the load that it has to bear now. And it is fast reaching a tipping point. And just identifying those pieces of equipment or complete circuits is important to understand exactly how they play in this calculus of how do we reduce the risk of ignition, all three of the IOUs.
Anything else? This is so interesting and exciting for me to hear this conversation. So that's what public meetings are all about. So I really thank you for elaborating. Mr. Tutt, next topic.
Next slide. So this topic is communication and community outreach. And the board is recommending that WMPs describe the linkage between outreach program direction from energy safety and other agencies to better understand how the whole outreach on wildfire issues works for communities. The board's also recommending enhanced reporting on collaboration with local authorities and community-based organizations. And in addition, or in particular, the prospects for the utility helping to fund those community-based organizations when they're dealing with wildfire safety and community safety issues. And then finally, the board is recommending that the utilities report on their outreach analytics. In other words, tell us what is working and how they know that it's working, whether it's a survey, which then shows that customers and from a particular outreach effort have gleaned more and better information than from other outreach efforts. That's the kind of information we're looking for so that we can understand what works for keeping the community informed about what's going on with wildfires.
Thank you. Any comments here? I have one comment to underscore the last point, and it is, again, we're not looking to repeat what is filed anywhere. We're just looking to understanding that what the utilities are doing that's directed by either, or not either by all of the oversight type agencies. So the Public Utilities Commission, when we're working with the publicly owned utilities, we get reports on what they do with their city and county governments. I do want to recognize, and as we do in the recommendations, so I'll state it here publicly, that we have seen a great deal of improvement, as we indicated, and San Diego appreciated. We see them setting the bar on this, and but everyone has, both the other utilities have made significant progress. And I want to also acknowledge the fact that PG&E in its WMP actually has some examples of these analytics where we want to make sure that the optimal way of communicating information around wildfire threat, PSPS, events, and any other public safety emergency due to wildfire is communicated effectively and the message is being heard. So thank you. Have we come to the end of the topics?
I believe we have. Next slide, please. Yes.
Great, thank you. So now is the time we can, I think we did a sort of section by section comments as well as observations. I think there was some discussion before, but this is our opportunity to have further discussion or to make some general comments. So I'll actually go through each board member just to see if they want to raise anything now, and we are allowed, this is our moment to ask each other questions as well. So Mr. Mader, do you have anything you want to raise?
Vice Chair Feldman, I'd actually like to, is this an appropriate time to offer the amendment to the plan?
And we'll do that right before we vote.
Okay, then, no, I'm fine, I've made my comments.
I didn't like comments as well.
I don't think that these recommendations are overreaching. We're becoming, and not that I don't think that anyone's accused us of being overreaching, but we've reinforced what we've a theme that we've published for the last 3 years. More concise, easier to what is being done so that we can track it, so that we can actually measure it and understand whether it's successful or not. That's what these recommendations are. And I hopefully we continue to evolve and get to a point to where this is no longer the #1 concern of California every wildfire season.
Thank you. I have no further comments. I think I've made all of mine. I do have one question again to our legal counsel, which is, would this be, we don't have it on the agenda, I don't think, but is this an appropriate time to take public comment on the recommendations?
We should.
Yes, good, perfect. So I do, Mr. Touch, could you please let us know what written comments were filed on the recommendations? And we did appreciate the recommendation, as you can see in real time, we're making modifications based on those recommendations. So please keep them coming. I didn't see any from PG&E, so PG&E did not file any this time, but Edison and San Diego did, correct?
That is correct, Vice Chair Feldman. We got comments from Southern California Edison, San Diego Gas and Electric, and the coalition of small and jurisdictional utilities in California.
And I'm going to look at my, again, fellow board members and for assent on this, because I think it reflects our interest, which is we do produce these recommendations once a year, and they are driven by the schedule on the WMP guidelines. However, we are a board we have BK Biolically Keen restrictions, but we do not have any ex parte restrictions. So we welcome dialogue and conversation. I'll talk a little bit about the end, but anytime you want to contact us, go through our advisor, Mr. Tutt, and we've had conversations on many different topics with the utilities, with different people from the utilities and different stakeholders. So please feel free to contact us, and we would again welcome those remarks. We're open to ideas. This is all new, and we want to make it better, as Mr. Board Member Porter so aptly stated. So thank you for that. Any comments on that? I assume I was speaking on behalf of all of you.
Yes, I made my comments based on the public comments that we received.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mr. Feldman, for the record, there may be an organization out there called the Coalition of Small Multi-Jurisdictional Utilities, but that's not the one that commented to us.
Okay, correction.
The correct name is the California Association of Small and Multi-Jurisdictional Utilities.
Very good. All right. So now we come to the time for the vote and the adoption of the recommendations.
We're going to take public comment.
Oh, right, public comment. Mr. Anders, is there any public comment?
No hands raised currently.
I'll pause for a minute to see if any hands were raised. Are there any public comments on the phone?
No hands raised.
Mr. Tutt, did we receive any emails?
Nothing in the WSAB email inbox.
Again, we are going to adopt the recommendations, but it's a very what's the word I want? Elastic process as we go through it. We're learning, and we learn from you. So please reach out to us. And now what we will do is sequence our votes. So the first will be, I think what we should do is have Mr. Tutt. How should we do it? Should Mr. Mader file the motion or make the motion, or should Mr. Tutt read what the potential clarification is first?
So the motion would be to approve the recommendation as amended. So
No, it would be first to adopt an amendment to the recommendations, then do the whole
Sure.
recommendations. If we can do it
I
that
would
way.
like to make a motion to offer
Could you speak up? I think.
yes, Chair Feldman, this is
Thank you.
Board Member Mader.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a motion to for an amendment, thank you, to the recommendations. And the amendment would read as follows. And it goes to Stephanie's comments regarding to the intent of our amendment. I don't actually have the exact words ready, but it would be intends to amend its recommended actions to clarify it is not the intent of the amendment recommendations to change regulatory bodies' mission or authority, but rather for the WMP's wildfire mitigation plans to clearly communicate the relevant regulatory proceedings that the WMP's risk mitigation efforts are dependent on, so that the WMP's effectiveness can be measured to the goal of developing better WMPs in the future.
Second.
And point of clarification, I believe you said at the beginning that suggested language, not
It goes to what Stephanie
The
said,
intent.
stating the intent of our future
Very good.
amendment.
and you have that in writing that you can forward to Mr. Tudd?
I do.
Thank you.
I would, with as much precision as we can, like, do you have a place in the recommendation about
Yes.
the page number, that sort of thing? I think I would clarify that on the record as much as
It's
possible.
in the scope and structure of the WMPs, and I'm trying to read it off my phone, so it's very difficult for me.
Do you have that up that you can find the page number, Mr. Tudd?
Sure, yes.
I think that's close enough. We don't need a paragraph.
So it would probably be on page number, at the beginning of the structure and scope section, which currently is on page number 8, I believe. And I'm saying currently only because as we finalize the document, there may be some formatting questions that change the page numbering, but it would be right at the beginning of the structure and scope section.
Would we have to change anything in the recommendations language?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, and I think it's also in the third paragraph there. Well, we have it narrowed down to the area. Very good. So we have a motion and second that structure and scope will be, I don't want to call it amendment because it's not really a law or a bylaw. I want to call it a revision. It may make that friendly amendment to your motion that
If you must, Chair Philbin.
I'm an attorney. What can I say?
We're talking about the dicta of the report, right?
All right, moved in second. Let's, Mr. Tuck, call the vote on the revision.
Calling a vote on the revision. Vice Chair Feldman,
Aye.
Board Member Porter,
Aye.
Board Member Mader, Board Member Armstrong.
Aye.
Motion passes. So now we'll move the recommendations for approval.
I move that the California Wildfire Safety Advisory Board adopts the recommendations as revised.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? Call the question? Call the vote?
Okay, we're calling the vote. Board Member Armstrong,
Aye.
Board Member Mader,
Aye.
Board Member Porter,
Aye.
Vice Chair Feldman.
Aye.
4-0.
Motion passes. We now have adopted 2023 recommendations, what he said at the beginning of the meeting with respect to the title. We're about to close. I just wanted to see if there were any closing comments by the board members.
Vice Chair Feldman, I'm just glad to be in the same room as my fellow board members as we work on this important work for the people of California. And I look forward to further meetings where we'll be able to move that agenda forward.
I second that.
I'm third in that.
And I'll square it off here.
There it is.
So as a fourth. Thanks again.
Chair, before you adjourn, I just want to make a note that we're not going to have the potential updates from the stakeholders, which is item 5 on the public agenda, and that there will be no closed session. for this
Okay,
meeting.
great. Thank you for that.
No problem.
Mr. Tutt, did you have any closing comments?
I just, my only closing comment is, again, this was a this meeting started out with a little bit of iffiness about how it would work. We'll get better as we move forward into this new arena of public meetings, and hopefully the legislature will act to make things easier for us in the future.
So we have flexibility. Yes, absolutely. And again, thanks to everyone for their patience, and to our excellent IT staff who bore with us. And thanks to the Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety, Ms. Morgans, for your update if you're still on, and to hosting us in your agency, and we get to see this beautiful energy efficient building. And I just also want to extend my hope and prayers that we do, as Mr. Tutz said at the beginning of the meeting, that our season for potential wildfire is not devastating, and that we can approach it with, and with the success actually that we've been having in the past, over the past few years, with regard to containment and protecting property and life. So with that, I think I'm going to ask Mr. Armstrong, since he didn't get to make a motion, about moving to adjourn.
Okay, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
Do we have a roll call on that?
No, as long as there's no objection, we can adjourn.
Any objection? Thank you very much. The meeting is now concluded.